I'm very pleased to be talking with Zoe Friend this morning for kind of a special event about her solo exhibition called Expansive Baroque at the Suffolk University Gallery. And as I was just saying, the gallery, since we can't really have visitors, we have created a robust online presence. And so there's a virtual tour with me. Zoe did a great studio visit that her husband Richard recorded, so that's on the website. We did a fun time-lapse install video, which is kind of funny, and just focus on the sort of the main piece that's in the exhibition. And then what I always do with exhibitions, and I used to kind of have it in the gallery, but now it's just part of the website, is I like to do a deep dive into whatever the subject matter is. So I did that with the idea of Baroque. So there's all kinds of cool videos and reading references and so on, music that talk about the Baroque. I see Zoe's Friend work, as does she, as kind of contemporary Baroque. And so I wanted to, demonstrate and, kind of use as a kind of a teaching guide for the historical Baroque. So I'm just going to do a real quick intro to Zoe. A lot of you know her since she just graduated a year ago. She studied illustration at Pratt before she became a ceramics artist. And Zoe, you apprenticed with someone, right?
Yeah, I apprenticed under an artist named Allison Newsom, who, excuse me, formerly taught at RISD. And I think she's actually moved on to technically be a metal sculptor now.
But so that was how you studied ceramics?
Yes, yeah, I lived in her studio, recycled clay for 4 hours a day, old school apprentice style, had a sleeping bag on the floor kind of thing.
Right. Very hands-on, right?
Very hands-on.
Appropriate for ceramics. And then she made a big transition to our graduate program, and her work, I'd say the underpinnings of the work are sort of similar, but the materials are completely different. And it's just interesting. Something Zoe and I have talked a lot about is, this kind of change from a student, from student to an alum, and then to an artist in the field. And then, how my role with her also changed from teacher, critic, to gallery curator, and then to offering her a solo show. And just a little bit about that. Usually I don't do solo shows, very rarely, but I thought the work would be a good fit for the gallery, for actually even the space of the gallery. And yeah, so this, it's just interesting how roles change. And Zoe now is a professional artist, and even though I know her in a different way, that is how we interacted, professional curator, professional artist. So I think with that brief intro, Zoe is going to share her screen and show us some images from the gallery and talk about her process. Then we'll follow that with a conversation. I'll start with, I'll kind of get it going, and then you are all welcome to unmute yourselves or put information in the chat. And we are recording this, so anyone who wasn't able to come this morning can hear the talk. Okay, Zoe.
All right, moment of truth here. Let's see. Share. All right, can you all see? What are you all looking at right now?
There.
I am looking at your white sculpture.
Excellent. Okay. Yes. First of all, I just want to say how thrilled I am to be here with you all. It's so nice to see so many faces in one place, and to be able to talk about art is another treat. Okay, so as some of you may have seen this in person, and stop me if I'm going through these a little too fast. This is my main piece, Vestige, which actually began, I think, the second semester I was at Lesley. Certain components were I build it in a very modular way. So certain components of this were built during various semesters, and it all came together during the thesis semester. It's, for those of you who haven't seen it in person, it's a life-size, I'm sorry, my dog is coughing in the other room. It's a life-size taxidermy forms, essentially. So these are all life-size animals. I put them together in a sort of natural history diorama motif, and then they are embellished and built out with mostly plastic single-use disposables, such as plastic cutlery, straws, six-pack holders, bottle caps and tops that I saved from my own life, PVC pipes. Oop, how do I? Okay, so the first picture we just looked at, that was the install at Lesley. This is the install at Suffolk Gallery, which I wanted to include these because, or include the first one, which isn't actually the show, to show how this piece has many different installation potentials. This is it with some of the foliage has been moved to the actual structure of the ceiling. The layout of the branches is slightly different. So here is a detail just so you can get a sense of what the sort of 1 foot experience from the piece is like, because it has so much detail work, and which is, you know, a facet of Baroque aesthetic. It's sort of hard to not engage with it at several levels. I also like including this because this bobcat took as much work as the rest of the piece because it was all hand glued straws, something like 5,000 of them. And then here is, I incorporated electricity and lighting into this piece, which was something that I've been playing around with earlier pieces that we'll also see here. And I wanted to show this because it sort of captures a little bit of my favorite thing, which is mimicking nature through man-made, which is where this sort of the name of the piece comes from, which is the things we're sort of replacing. It's sort of a vestige, an old defunct thing. So these are chandelier crystals masquerading as crystal clusters. It's also a favorite of material of mine because I think chandelier crystals are sort of, they're like a approximated luxury in my book. Like they have no inherent value, but we see them as so fancy. Same with false pearls and sort of hokey jewelry, that you'll see those come up as non-plastic disposable items in my pieces a lot because I like them. I think they're very lovely and tacky and kitschy. Here's some more details of the piece, the antlers and such. These were just nice photos I wanted to include so you could get a sense of the really minuscule going on in this enormous artwork. Yeah. And so this is the other piece that incorporates electricity. And this is, again, taken from an installation not at Suffolk, just because I tend to also, Suffolk was the first time I showed this piece, which is 2 pieces, like so. But this rear end, I don't know how else to put it, functions very, very nicely as its own piece, which is good to have on hand. It's become one of my favorite pieces. I know you're not supposed to have favorite, but it's become one of my favorite pieces because it can be either this room filling object or it can be a sort of just this single standalone pillar. This one, I don't know if we captured any detail photos of it, but this at the sort of, oh yes, we have. So at the very, very, very small level, this piece is totally inhabited with tiny humans. And this again comes back to the thing that I think is important of engaging the viewer at a multitude of distances. And while that's not necessarily a value that's inherent or that needs to be applied to all artwork, it's something that I really enjoy because I'm fussy. This is, again, talking about not having favorites. This is probably my favorite piece just because it's so cooperative. This thing can just go anywhere and go kerplunk on a wall and it takes up a whole wall. And I love it for that fact, and the fact that it requires basically no setup, which is important when you've got other pieces that maybe aren't as cooperative, like the larger pieces. This was the first time I had landed on an all white surface treatment, and it was so liberating that it informed the rest of my work moving forward with the program. As Deb mentioned, I have an illustration background, and so a major handicap for me is that I have a tendency to be very literal with my surface treatments. And in fact, that was something that was really coming back and biting me during ceramics. So painting a thing entirely white was enormously helpful to keep me from falling back on those tendencies. I just noticed I left a bulldog clip on for this photo up in the crown. Let's just move right along from that. Whoop, there's nothing here, sorry. This was another piece that's a nice segue into some of the older work from my ceramic days that I brought in for the show. Deb and I were jokingly talking about how the show is a first-time solo show and a retrospective in a sense. But so this was actually, I was finding myself in the studio, as you could have seen with the Bobcat, for instance, getting really, really hyper-focused. I have a tendency to do that, and it can kind of cripple you in terms of output, or cripple one in terms of output. At least for me, it's an easy rabbit hole to fall down. So I was challenged by my mentor, Christopher Frost, to create a piece in an hour. And this was also a great way to start incorporating advanced materials like this pourable foam. If any of you in sculpture haven't been turned on to Reynolds Advanced Materials out in, I think it's Medford or something, definitely check it out. It's like a gold mine. They sell anything that you could want to pour onto or near a piece. So this became a really good exercise for me to come back to, learning to just sort of go hands off with the pieces. And again, this comes down to a sort of that place of finding the strange intersection of man and nature, because these are all man-made objects masquerading very blatantly as natural things. And I love that. I think it's really fun to sort of be lied to very obviously. I don't know why there are these blank ones. I went through this all this morning. Okay. These are the 3 pieces that came in from my ceramics days. These were the last pieces I ever did in ceramics, and they represented a real departure for me. I was very heavily a retail artist at the time. I made a lot of small, easily purchasable things, and because my studio has a open studio every month with a large foot presence, I was letting my work be informed very much by the clients that were buying it. And while it was an excellent milestone to reach, to know that I could sustain myself on that practice, I couldn't sustain myself as an artist on that practice, just creativity wise. So I challenged myself to make something that I had no intention of selling. And I made these. This was also the first time I began to abandon literal surface treatment, just sort of, I would hit these with like 5, 6, 7 layers of glaze and throw them in the kiln and just say, well, those were nice kiln shelves at one point. And that was it. The most literal I got was painting the eyes. But this also represented the end of clay for me, because I began pushing it past the point that it was really meant to do. And it didn't feel right. It felt like I was battling with the materials rather than working with them. So at that point, and because I hurt my back, I decided that I needed to figure out how to be able to sustain myself creatively as an artist, which led to me applying to Lesley, and how to branch out in terms of materials. So that's how I arrived at bricolage, I guess is what I would, or assemblage is what I would call what I'm doing, because it's a very intuitive process of just grabbing a thing and adding it or subtracting, or there's more creative problem solving. So that was a very process-driven spiel I just gave you. So let me just stop. I think we're at the end of these. I don't know what happened with those blank ones. This is my first time using Google Slides. All right. Is my face back?
Yes.
Excellent. Deb, did I miss anything?
No, that's good. We had, in our preparation for this, we talked about that Zoe would show the work and talk about sort of making the work. So I'm gonna, I have a couple of statements actually from the press release that I'm gonna
Hey.
share, and then maybe Zoe, you can elaborate. But I also want to mention that I didn't say before, which is that kind of because of the COVID moment, Zoe, we had scheduled her show for last June, and I was
Oh,
excited
yeah.
having it at the same time as the residency, and you know, then we had to postpone till September. That didn't work. Postponed again till December, and now the show is going to be extended, which I'm actually happy, very
Oh,
happy,
same.
to February 19th. And so, you know, it was frustrating to just, I mean, in a way, I didn't know what was really going on with the gallery, and, you know, there were so many other factors. But Zoe, what I want to say is that that kind of gave us an opportunity to have a kind of much longer and kind of deeper conversation about the work and about how we, you know, just our whole, our process of making the show in the excuse me, in the gallery. And another thing I want to mention is, and this is just something that maybe you wouldn't experience, but I did as, you know, curating in that space, is because their work, not the ceramics, but the other works are all, you know, some kind of white, that when it was the lighting, it kind of pushed against the light, not absorbing at all. And it was very interesting to see the gallery transpose, which always happens in exhibitions. The gallery, the space is kind of, you know, mute until it's activated by the work. And this work activates the space in a very, very different way, interesting way to me. So I just want to mention those two things.
I love that observation. Yeah, there's a moment in the time lapse where my husband turns all the lights towards the piece, and it's like the whole room changes dimensions somehow.
Right.
I hadn't really considered that. Thank you for that, Deb.
Yeah, and also, I mean, this often happens with sculptural objects, but you know, the way the cast shadows are, you know, playing
Yeah.
out on the walls, you know, it becomes like another aspect or dimension to the work that you wouldn't see in your studio. And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
so let me quote from the press release, which I was talking with someone about this, that, about writing, how important writing is for artists. So I think it's great that you're in a program that emphasizes writing, you know, really quite a bit. So that's very useful when you have to write a statement for, you know, a gallery to see if they want to take your work. So, and what I do with artist statements is I use them, and then I kind of, you know, I use them as the basis for a press release or so on. So Zoe Friend's work is best described as maximalist, monochrome, Baroque-inspired assemblage, her words. She says, I work in a language of disposable plastic objects executed in the language of early natural history dioramas. My focus is on the consumer sublime and where our relationship with nature intersects with societal detritus. These notions of excess are captured through the lens of the Baroque, a highly decorative and maximalist language of motifs largely borrowed from and inspired by nature. In her work, this imparts a contradiction between the highly ornate and sumptuous motifs and the lowly trash material from which they are constructed. So would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, I would love to. So I grew up in Boston, downtown Back Bay, back before it really experienced this sort of renaissance that it's going through now in terms of, well, just wealth. Back then, it was more of a artsy, kind of crumbling, beautiful but derelict neighborhood. And I think I mentioned this in the studio thing, but you know, I've only got so much material. But the accessibility of what was formerly a very elite and very untouchable motif around me, which was the Victorian Baroque architecture, that really informed my love of the decorative and also my love of the sort of the touchable, in a sense. There is nothing precious or necessarily delicate about the work that I do. In fact, it changes every time I install it because of the nature of what it is. You know, the plastics degrade, UV exposure discolors it, et cetera. So I'm always in a state of repairing or adding, and I actually really enjoy that aspect of it and have built it in as a sort of fourth dimension of the work. And in terms of the Baroque, I love the Baroque as a period because it's doing exactly what I'm trying to do with the forks and knives and spoons, which is to sort of lie to you, to say, this is natural, I swear, while also being highly decorative. And it's again, it's a man-made approximation of what is a beautiful, chaotic, naturally occurring form. And I think that is such a wonderful example of almost like human hubris, to be like, well, I can do that just as good as nature can. And I think that while it was very relevant to the Victorian era and Baroque era, which I pull a lot of my, obviously pull a lot of my aesthetic from, those times represent, we're going through a similar dysfunction in terms of their relationship to the natural world as we are, what with the advent of the Industrial Revolution or large-scale farming in the Baroque era, or the huge wealth disparities that were occurring in both of those eras. I think that they are more relevant to this time than we maybe want to give them credit for. So that also sort of guided me in terms of how I wanted to focus on the tension between us as consumers and us as human beings living on a planet. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's very good.
So that's how I arrived at trash.
Right. It's interesting to think about, which I haven't until you just mentioned, you know, how the art, you know, how often artists are expressing what's going on in their society and in the culture, you know, even if they don't know that's what they're doing, but that they're, you know, the relationship to, in the Victorian age anyway, the Industrial Revolution, and, you know, changes during the Baroque period as well. And, you know, I was thinking about maybe the best known Baroque painter, Caravaggio, who, you know, he really wanted to make a point, and he did that with the kind of excessive gesture and the lighting, and, you know, it's just over the top. And, you know, you can, we sometimes use the word Baroque as an adjective, you know, it's like, it's Baroque, you know, meaning it's like excessive, it's too much, you know.
Yeah.
It is the opposite of a minimal gesture. This would be the excess gesture. And it's interesting. That's, you know, maybe just part of your, I don't know, DNA or something. I mean, that's just what you do.
I will level with you. When I got to Lesley, and maybe a couple of the faculty remember this, but I was determined to work. I wanted so badly to learn to work minimalistically, sort of exquisitely and small. Those were my goals. And I think maybe it was Laurel Sparks or maybe Oliver, who was just like, no, don't do that. But I had really fetishized the idea of having this small and perfect, serene practice. I work in a building with a lot of different artists, and the peoples who seem to maintain that value in their work, I really envied like the state of their studios and how it reflected on just their sort of demeanor. But once I got to the program, I was told very definitely that wasn't what I was meant for. So I began sort of divesting from that sort of fantasy and really embracing the things that were natural to me, which is just too much. And yeah, I know it sounds very cliche to be like, oh, I discovered who I was, but I think that also the explosion of excess in my work once I got to Lesley reflects how I was until then sort of resenting myself for doing it. As
Well, maybe perhaps there's an ambivalence between the consumer, consumer trash and all the plastic in the ocean, and your work is sometimes you actually buy plastic forks.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so you're kind of contributing in a way, but maybe your pieces will be, it will be artwork for forever or something.
who knows?
So to me, there's that kind of tension. And what, for the viewer, it's awesome that you like, have 5,000 straws to, create the animal. So I think there's also that kind of attraction repellent thing that's going on. That's how, for me as a viewer, I bet that shows up.
Yes, I'm glad it does. I have and I think, again, I've talked about this. I have a great anxiety regarding my work and my work process. I know that there's a lot of people who have the wonderful fortune to being able to get meditative, to have a meditative process that calms them, and maybe they can sort of expel all their bad vibes. My work process is very driven by anxiety. My anxiety as a consumer just fits right into that slot. So that was actually kind of a good thing. I'm sort of able to unload into it, but it is very apparent, I think, when you look at it, that it's created in an anxious gesture. Because of the level of detail, because of the materials choices, which are slightly provocative. The Bobcat was constructed right when the plastic straw was becoming sort of a dog whistle for environmentalists. So that wasn't an accident. The fact that it's made in all of these highly publicized, environmentally detrimental materials is an encapsulation of that anxiety. And I'm hoping, my hope is that when you view the piece, you're immediately sort of just hit with objectively, it's beautiful, it's big, it's engaging. But slowly, depending on how much you want to think about it or how much you want to engage with it, the sort of sinister aspects of it unravel a bit for you as a viewer.
And I think you're in good company with artists who are expressing, how upset they are about the, global climate change and so on. People like, she's actually in the Boston Sculptors Gallery, Michelle Luigi, who has been a mentor for at least one of our students, and she makes things she collects plastic bags and makes objects and so on out of that. So I think there's a lot of people who are, doing that. So that could be an exhibition or two.
Yeah, the land of trash. Oof. Yeah, I was so happy to find myself in her in her company when I joined ranks with Boston Sculptors, because I think I used her in a couple of papers. So that was a dream come true. But now we're sort of we're battling it out for who gets to collect trash from all the other members. She's put out a call for trash, and I'm like, but I want that trash.
That's good. Well, she's your kind of compatriot. So for people not in the Boston area, Boston Sculptors Gallery is a member sculpture gallery, like it sounds. And Zoe has very recently been accepted as one of the members. So that's what I'm alluding to. Zoe, maybe you could talk about kind of it's kind of the theme here of, how you are functioning as an artist during this during the pandemic. I mean, there's many other things going on, but specifically that. I'm just curious how, what kind of work you're doing.
Oh, yeah. Well, first I'd like to qualify that it's a stretch to say I'm functioning, period. But because I work in a building with so many other artists, and myself and my family have some unique health challenges that make us all very high risk. I've actually suspended my studio practice basically for the past 10 months, with the exception of preparing for the show at Suffolk, where I was in pretty much every day as normal, making sure that all the electrical was still up and running, et cetera. But so what I have done is I've taken a step back and started to address my technical debt. This is a term I learned from my techie husband. Basically, I have come out of the Lesley program with a body of work, but I also came out with a defunct website that no longer is relevant to what I do, photos that need to be retouched, a litany of writing to do, all of these new responsibilities for the Boston Sculptors Gallery. Because it's a co-op gallery, you have to do things like sign up for a job, et cetera. So I have spent the last 10 months essentially addressing that backlog, which is was a huge blessing. It's a normal work day, essentially a 9 to 5 of writing, photo editing, learning to photo edit, website updates, things like this, which are a nice little break in the monotony of technical debt. And beyond that, I've also come up with some plans for future pieces once I get back into the studio. And I've just recently signed up to collaborate with artist Sally Fine, who some of you might know from the Boston area, on a sculpture for a show being proposed for the Boston Sculptors Gallery in August. So it's difficult for me to look back and say and realize how my studio practice wasn't able to be safely addressed during all this. And it's hard to drum up self-worth in moments of self-doubt when I'm not actually producing any physical objects. But at the same time, this work all needed to get done, and I didn't want to do it. If there was no pandemic, I would have never gotten to all these very important aspects of my professional life, because I really do enjoy the act of making the work. I think most of us really prefer to make work versus write about it, edit photos of it, or submit it to shows. So the answer is I'm doing my best.
It sounds to me actually, and I think, many of us are anxious, and there's so much going on like every single day. And that, yes, we are driven to make things, that's what we do. That's our sort of our assignment, is to be makers. And especially someone like you, where, it's very obsessive in a certain way, and, time consuming, and it's really, the process is like imperative to the work. But I was just going to say, what you described doesn't sound so terrible, that you're kind of taking, not a restart, but, just addressing things that are part of being an artist,
Yeah.
nowadays. And that has to do with slides and, websites and so on.
Well,
Also, so it seems like that maybe is, and this is something I have asked all my speakers in the seminar, like, is there a silver lining in spite of all that's been going on? So that sounds to me like a little bit of a silver lining.
I can add also that as a sculptor, I should have started with, well, I've actually been in more shows during the past 10 months than I have for probably the last 5 years of my career, because so many shows were remote, shows that I might not have been able to participate in, out in Revere Beach, outdoors, or et cetera, et cetera. I was able to just submit good digital photos of my work and be in those shows, be a presence, which was, it felt a little bit like cheating, because, as a sculptor, I'm used to having to have this whole, maybe some of the 2D artists are like, yeah, of course, this is the way to do it. But man, you guys are onto something. Being a sculptor is now that I've had a taste of 2D and virtual, I'm gonna miss it in certain aspects of it. And things like being able to do this virtual show at Suffolk, that's a huge opportunity for me. And it really drove home how important the web presence is, not just the physical presence. Right. So yeah, silver lining.
Yes, and for me, it's something that I, was never really required to do. We created a website, and we had, it was, kind of modest, and we are required to do something quite different. And so I just want to say, from Curator point of view, it's also been a learning curve. And silver lining for us is that, you know, even when we are going to be, let's say in a year, hopefully be back in person, that, you know, we'll still create a large, or as large as we can, online presence. So we'll have, you know, we'll have this kind of two things at the same time, or an equivalence with both. So
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the clock. We're going to end around 10:50. So I'd love for anyone to comment or say hello, especially Zoe's people that Zoe knew from the program. So floor is open.
Hi, everyone. I miss you all. It's so nice to see you and to see the bottom half of so many faces.
Eileen, yeah, sure.
Hi, Zoe.
Hi, Eileen.
How are you?
I'm doing great. I've been following everything you're doing on Facebook. It's so nice you came.
Thanks. I have a question for you, though. One of the things about your work that always really interested me is sort of this trophy aspect. And it's sort of like this masculine area of maybe hunting, which is maybe more masculine, feminine, but then you sort of feminize it in some way, or claim that. And I wanted to know if you thought about that at all when you were putting the work together.
You know, I will level with you. When I brought in those ceramic deer heads I showed were what I came to Lesley with. It had not occurred to me that they were actually echoing a hunting aspect, because my life has been so inundated with natural history museums that the aesthetic hadn't even dawned on me as I was making them. It was kind of like oh my God, yes, of course this is masculine. Of course this is hunting. But I don't know if I'm claiming it with femininity so much as I also, when it was pointed out to me by Deb Todd Wheeler that the pearls and such were overtly feminine, that also just genuinely hadn't occurred to me. I think it's more of a serendipity that the two things were so polarized and came together in this sort of mishmash of strangely and I guess unnecessarily gendered motifs. That was a good question. I wish I had thought of it. I wish that I had planned these things, I guess would be the answer.
Well, you know, Zoe, often those, you know, you're making the work and you don't quite know how, you know, you don't quite know what's going to come out of the work. So
Yes.
that comes from the viewer, like Eileen's comment.
Yeah.
Ben, do you have something?
Oh, did you ask me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I have many questions. So,
Oh no.
no, they're not bad. I thought, you know, one of our entering students, Amy Decker, mentioned the term task positive, which I really liked, and I think is very aligned with your work, where, you know, there's such an interesting fluctuation of value and fluctuation of position. And I think one place of great value is like the amount of care to make that bobcat is like, oh, well, she really, really cared about this. And personally, I don't find anything, you know, what I enjoy about the plastic is that I think it's kind of explicitly sinister, when other things like a strawberry shows up in the supermarket 12 months out of year, that to me is much more invisibly sinister. Or like, you know, the provenance of cashews and chocolate and all that is like really, really problematic. Well, the plastic is, I think, much more. And I think what's disarming about it is transforming something like the fork, which is so, you know, either ignored or sort of disliked, and turning it into something of value, which I think kind of imparts other senses of value. But I guess my one thought is I really like the white on white for this show. And it made me think that, you know, does the white provide a kind of timelessness, right? Almost like a Greek statue. And so therefore there's no cultural coloration or texture that, you know, informs one location or another. And second, you know, just the idea that, you know, if you installed this in, you know, an area that had like stone walls versus like, you know, a painted mural or wallpaper, how you would learn from it. And so I'm curious what you've learned seeing your work in this very new context, and also together.
Great question.
Well, this is the first time, I'll sort of do it in reverse order. This is the first time I've actually seen it installed anywhere with white walls, which was really cool. And it looked exactly how I had hoped it would look with all the shadows that Deb was describing. And in fact, the first time I visited the studio, I mean, not the studio, the gallery, and the notable difference between any other installation sites was the ceiling height, which is a little lower than it's ever been installed in. My immediate reaction the first time I walked in was, oh my God, I'm going to put stuff all over this ceiling. And so seeing it in that space with the white on the white was sort of like, yes, I finally get to realize this intention that I had. So it was very gratifying to see it in there. I forgot the rest of your question. The sinister aspect. I love that. I've written down the term explicitly sinister. Yes, I also agree that the strawberries year round are very suspicious. And my hope is that once we start addressing all of the strange things that we take for granted, such as plastic forks, et cetera, and see what they're like in regard to a landscape, that maybe it'll shift our consumer suspicions towards other things that we see as more benign. That would be really nice. But I also have a tendency myself, as I'm sure a lot of us do, to get overwhelmed with that kind of consumer guilt. So I guess it kind of just is opening the door for that.
Well, to me, it's like a Tara Donovan piece, where it's like, you know, it's so easy to hate plastic straws and forks at first, and they're definitely worth hating, and hopefully, you know, bioplastics and bamboo and you know, less disposability is in our future. But I think the remarkable thing is to sort of transform that into something that becomes lovable, and you know what I mean, and expand, you know, what's a very you know, kind of simplified villain of the plastic disposable cutlery into something I think is much more, you know, open-ended. But anyway, I know there's only 6 minutes and there's a bunch of questions in the chat, so I don't want to monopolize, but thank you, Zoe.
Oh yeah, I'll just end that with, yes, I believe that the most good a plastic fork could do is if it's somehow transformed into a useful leaf, you know?
Yeah.
That'd be nice.
So let me just quickly read from the chat. Belle Struck has a question. You mentioned taxidermy. Is this a process you engage in explicitly, or is it a metaphor?
Do you mean, I myself don't engage in taxidermy. While I do collect pieces, I only collect vintage pieces for my own home. I wish I could turn the camera around. Again, this is just informed by my love and upbringing around natural history museums. I don't personally taxidermy anything, but I find the forms to be very compelling because of their muscle structure and the implication of sort of a skin to object. There's also a large repository of information out there for how to use them. So like repositioning them, learning what materials will stick to them. People have already been through it, so that's really helpful for facilitating a quick process that doesn't have a huge learning curve, which is important for me because I just want to build, you know?
Does anyone else want to comment or question?
Yeah, I have a question. Hi, Zoe. It's great to see you.
Hey.
You know, when I saw your thesis exhibition and then seeing the works again, great expectations, and specifically Miss Havisham and her wedding banquet were evoked. And I put a couple of pictures from a recent rendition of that movie in the chat.
Oh, good.
The white on white, the sense of, again, ruin, things falling apart, decay. Anyway, I just wonder if that was a reference for you, or?
Well, okay, so you are definitely the 100th caller who's referenced that, and I love that. I'm so honored to be compared to that aesthetic. Unfortunately, I didn't know about it early enough for it to inform my work, but what I'm gathering is that my upbringing in my environment when I was growing up was very Miss Havershammy, like this, you know, derelict, abandoned excess. You know, the 30-year-old dusty wedding cake was very much in my purview as a child. But once I found out about it, which I think was like semester 3 or something, boy, was I into it. So yes, it did inform it. And I'm so happy whenever anyone brings that up.
Awesome.
Yeah, I downloaded these images because I don't know if I'm going to be able to access them after the Zoom call. I'll check them out.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Zoe, it's Ransom.
Hi, Ransom.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. I had no idea you went to Pratt.
Oh, you didn't?
Yeah, I went.
Yeah,
I
I
went
think we talked about Facebook like briefly at one point, but I realized that my photo wasn't really me. It was me dressed up as something.
okay.
Yeah, you knew Rudy Gutierrez, my
Yes,
favorite
yes.
teacher.
Yeah. I told him you said hi.
Yeah, please do. He was such an important informer in my life.
Yeah, that's great. Congrats. Congrats. The work looks great. Just
Thank
love
you
it.
so much, Ransom.
Yeah. Take care.
So,
You too.
Edie has a question.
Hi Zoe, how are you?
I'm good.
I'm
Yeah,
so
you're-
excited for this. I think for us graduates looking into doing exhibition, so this is very informative for me to see your process. So my question is, does this process inform or expand your narrative about your work in any way?
Expand my, sorry,
Narrative.
my what?
Narrative,
Narrative.
yes.
Does it expand my narrative about my work? Yeah, actually, I think it does, because every time I see this work set up in a different context, it kind of reveals a little bit more about itself, whether it means to or not. But it's difficult to say whether or not it expands my narrative. Yes, I would say it does. I think you learn, I mean, every time I install these pieces, I'm like, oh, I have to make this shorter. It gets shorter and shorter because I find out things about the install that maybe weren't as streamlined as they could be. This was the fastest install I've ever done. And as far as all of these pieces went. So I don't know if it informs my my narrative about the work so much as it informs my understanding of of how to put it together.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I think what I'm learning now is like to see the artwork as a subject and object and that relationship, and then each time when I talk about it or each time somebody make a comment,
yeah,
it gives me more perspective and sometimes I'm not even aware of it while I did it. So that's why I was asking that question.
oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, every time I put this work up and it gets viewed, it's like it's like having someone else do my work for me. I get all these viewers coming in with their takes on it, and I get to be the one who absorbs it all and says, yes, this is what I meant. I suppose it's great. It's like having, 50 minds working on something than just one person. And I think I've alluded to the fact that in a vacuum, I was unable to realize very obvious motifs in my own work, i.e. like the hunting and what that meant in terms of gender stuff.
Right.
So yeah, it does. Actually, I'm sorry. That question was very smart and I wasn't.
Thank you. Okay.
So yes, even now, I hadn't even considered those questions.
I'm just being very mindful of time
Sorry.
for everybody. And that was a great question, Edie. And, I think, what that reminded me of, just to finish up that point, is that, the viewer, the audience projects oneself onto the art, onto the object or the image. And that, that relationship is the secondary one, but also informs the work, because if we were just making work and sort of, putting it away, that would be interesting or, useful. So anyway,
Thank you. Yes.
I want to thank Zoe Friend for her beautiful work and for being with us this morning. It was really a treat. And I'm sorry to keep it so short, but we all have something at 11. So Zoe, thanks again. And
Thank you guys for having me.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I miss you all. I can't wait to see you when this is all over. And just keep busy. Stay inside.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Deb, thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure.
Bye-bye.